Hey everybody, it's Mike. All right, so I have a question for you. Is borderline personality disorder, is it a disease, a mental illness, or is it a trauma response? Actually, let's get the word disease out of there. Let's just give that choice there. Is it a mental illness or is it a trauma response? I have seen on YouTube, as well as having people come onto my channel who have tried to make the argument that um, borderline personality disorder is not a mental illness. It is a response to trauma. And many people will say that using the label mental illness is stigmatizing, which would not be helpful. You're talking about people who have an issue, that are struggling for healing, that have been traumatized, and that we are stigmatizing them by saying that they have a mental illness. So I think trauma response is a pretty clear phrase. I think it very clearly describes, the process of what it's trying to represent, which is as a result of horrific trauma, abuse, neglect, trauma of some kind, then there is a response. And so the actions of people with borderline personality disorder, can we call it a disorder? Borderline personality disorder. The actions that are taken from within that context of the disorder, that those actions are a result of a response to trauma. And how does that differ from a mental illness? So, as you know, if you're new to this channel is devoted for people who have survived being in toxic relationships with primarily people who have untreated, or we can just call it toxic borderline personality disorder. Why don't we use that from now on? Because, as some people have pointed out, just because somebody gets into treatment and they're a borderline, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in them acting in constructive ways towards themselves and constructive in relationships. So I am not directing these videos towards people with borderline personality disorder who, number one, are able to handle their symptoms. If you're able to manage your symptoms, if you're able to act in ways that are constructive to you, and if you're able to invest in and be constructive in relationships with others, then these videos are not designed for you. In fact, they're not meant for people who have borderline personality disorder at all. That's not my intention. As it turns out, surprisingly enough to me, there are more than a few people with BPD who come and watch this channel, and according to them, they are learning a lot. It's helpful to them. So, nobody's more happy about that than I am. And I'm a little surprised, but I'm really happy to see it. But I'm not here to help them. That's not my goal, because I'm not a mental health professional and I do not have borderline personality disorder. So I can't say from experience what it's like. What I have experienced is having survived a very toxic, dysfunctional relationship with a woman who at the time was undiagnosed and of course was untreated for what I believe to be severe borderline personality disorder. And it's very confusing and painful for people who have been in those relationships, who, the non-borderlines. And I'm finding, in fact, I want to read some comments. Maybe I'll do that another time. I won't do that right now. But reading comments of people who have been in relationships with untreated borderlines or toxic borderlines, and have spent years. They've been out of those relationships for years, and they still haven't gotten over it. I just got a couple of comments in the past couple of days of, more than one person, but one person's coming to mind. 2 years afterward, this person still thinks about it. Every day there's a big chunk of this person's day where they think about the borderline, and they do things like drive into the neighborhood of where this person lives in the hopes of bumping into them and starting it all up. Others who are still angry and still hurt years later, who talk about what they want more than anything is to be able to sit down with their borderline ex and tell them, help them understand, here's what you did, how horrible it was, and why it hurt me, and in the hopes that their borderline partner will wake up and go, oh my gosh, yes, I see what I've done. Oh, that's so horrible. I'm so sorry. Let me make it up to you. And then they're still wanting the relationship. They're still hoping. The thing is, they're still in it. Even though you're not having, any communication with the borderline, doesn't mean that you've left the relationship. In your mind and your energy, you're still there. And that is, it's a very painful way to live. Anyway, so my hope is to try and help people recover from that, and I've shared how I do that, and I'll share that again. But before we do that, let's talk about the question. Is borderline personality disorder a mental illness, or is it a trauma response? And I want to address that. So let me, again, from my mental health professional standpoint, let me give you my definition of a mental illness. And this is, when I use the word mental illness, this is what I mean by it. A mental illness is when somebody at some point is triggered and they are incapable of seeing objective reality. That when you compare their experience or their perception of objective reality or other people, and you compare it to what is actually going on, you will see marked differences. So an obvious one is if, somebody's walking down the street and thinks that everybody has a dog head, and that there's a bunch of dog people walking around. Well, obviously that person is hallucinating, and, that could very well be a sign of some kind of mental illness. They're not seeing things accurately. So, as we know with borderline personality disorder, the experience, now there's a lot to borderline personality disorder besides what you and I might see. What we experience is, one of the symptoms, and that's really what's the most important aspect to us, because it's these particular symptoms that prevent us from having a healthy connection and relationship with them. And it is that same symptom that causes us so much pain and so much damage. And that is, as we know, borderlines go from idealization to devaluation. And that is because, among other things, they cannot hold two contrary, or I should say they have tremendous difficulty holding two contrary ideas in their mind at the same time, or two contrary feelings within them at the same time. And so they can only go from one to the other. So they either love you or they hate you. They either think that you are the best thing that has ever happened, the best person that is walking the earth, or you are the worst person that has ever walked the earth, and you are, And so what happens is that when they devalue you, they very often come to the conclusion that you have not just bad feelings and intentions for them, but that you have absolutely horrible thoughts, feelings, and intentions, and maybe you have planned out for months how to destroy them. And this can happen in a flash. They can go literally from one to the other. In fact, in my experience, that's usually what happens. They usually hit a high and then it goes down. So they'll really, really love you, and the love that they experience will actually trigger the devaluation, the whatever negative feelings that they may have, the mistrust, the fear, the hatred, the whatever it is. It goes from one to the other. So that's one of the symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And so those who say that it is a trauma response might say, now these are my words. By the way, I understand that. Trauma response. So let's take a look at that. Now, let me take a look at it from my perspective, what I would consider, the understanding, the logical understanding of trauma response. So what we know about borderline personality disorder is that it is caused by some trauma between the ages of 0 and 2 months of age, or 2 years of age, 0 and 2 years of age. These are the formative years where the human brain and the human psyche creates an identity, or at least the rudimentary beginnings of an identity. And it's really important for babies and toddlers to have parents who have the ability to reflect back to the child who the child is without any agenda. So you see this, one of the most famous, iconic pictures of this will be the pictures of Mother Mary and Jesus. And what you see is you see this, this motherly figure looking at the baby, and the baby will have a halo on it. She might have a halo too, but she's looking at the baby with a very neutral look. There's just this slightest hint of a smile and love, and they're looking into each other's eyes. This represents an absolutely essential aspect to children developing and learning to have an identity, because in that moment, what is happening is that the mother, ideally, the ideal mother has no agenda, only has unconditional love. Unconditional means that there's no conditions on it. I see you exactly for who you are, and I love what you present, not what I want you to be, but what you are, which allows the person to have this feeling that they can bring their identity to the forefront from the inside out. And when that gets established and it becomes imprinted on them, if you will, then they can grow and become healthy people. And that is what allows people as adults to have opposing thoughts and feelings and still take constructive action. That's what allows them to do that, because they have an identity. So when contrary thoughts and feelings, irrational thoughts and feelings, come into their reality, they can see that and go, wow, that doesn't make sense, but that's all right, because I know who I am, and I am this, and I love myself, and I have value, and I have worth, and therefore I don't have to react to whatever somebody is saying or doing in any way. Either I don't have to completely fall in love with you because you showed attention to me, or I'm, going to dislike you or hate you because you frighten me. They don't have to do that. They have the ability to stay within themselves. They might have these impulses and thoughts and feelings fly through them, and they might be in conflict, but the power of their identity, which was laid during those formative years from 0 to 2 years, because the mother reflected back to the child with unconditional meaning, love without any agenda, no projection. What I'm saying is that the mother ideally does not project onto the child her own fears, her own insecurities, or her own desires, or her own fantasies. She doesn't have any of that going on. She just sits there like a perfect mirror that just contains love, and the child looks up and the mother reflects back. You see that with mimicking. So, you see, I'm sure you've experienced this, but you just have to go anywhere, sit at a bus station or anywhere where there's mothers with kids and they've got their little kids. And at some point, you're going to see the little kid looking up at the mom going, ah, ooh, ah. And the mother will go, ah, ooh, ah. It's just an instinct. They reflect it, they mimic. And it's a way of saying to the child, your unique experience is valid. You exist, and you exist as this particular unique individual. And that creates a healthy identity. Now, this is why I say, I think the worst, I'm not going to compare, but I mean, for me, abandonment and neglect have got to be among the worst, if not the worst offender here. Because when you don't have the mother, if the mother doesn't have the ability to just be there physically, to nurture the child, and love the child, and hold the child, and, like I said, mimic back, coo back and forth. If the infant from 0 to 2 doesn't get that, the message that comes across is you don't exist. It's worse than you being bad. It's that you don't exist. That's horrible. It's a horrific black hole. So people who have a borderline personality disorder walk around with this huge black hole within them. And so all of the things that they do, which we look at as being, less than ideal, the dangerous behavior, constantly, some of them, there's a whole list, and I can't remember the whole list, but dangerous behavior is one of them. Seeking out intense experiences all the time. Drug use, alcohol use, sexual experiences, jumping from one sexual experience to another. All the other things. This is the facades that they wear. The superficial. They can only be superficial in their connections with people. And by superficial, I don't say that as a judgment. I mean that, you can't get too intimate with them, because if it gets truly intimate, it triggers them to devalue you and to push you away. So it doesn't mean when I say superficial that you don't have intense feelings if you're a borderline, because you do. Borderlines have extremely intense feelings, probably more intense than we might be able to comprehend. So you hear about the borderlines who are very reactive and violent and have temper tantrums. And I never experienced that, but I was, early on when I was researching it, I was watching a mental health professional talking about having seen a full-grown man have a temper tantrum the same way that a toddler does. And he says it's one thing when you see a toddler on the floor screaming and pounding and throwing things, and it's one thing when you see that, and it's another thing when you see a full-grown adult have that same experience. But that's because the intensity of their feelings are so intense that they don't have any ability, or they have very little ability to modulate their emotional experiences and expressions. So when borderlines, those of you like me who, saw the borderlines as just being very evil, manipulative people, which, I did, and I had to, at the end of my relationship, I had to in order to separate, so that kind of judgment and resentment and anger can be healing for a very short period of time, because it makes you realize I didn't deserve that. That's the whole point of that. The whole point of you saying they're evil, they're manipulative, they do this, they don't deserve any sympathy, that is a short-lived emotion that should give you the ability to disconnect and go, hey, I didn't deserve that. I deserve better than that. There's something wrong with you. That's not my fault. That's on you. Then you should ideally have the ability to go and do more research and understand, and then have compassion. So I do, as you can tell, I have tremendous compassion for the borderline. In fact, I got to say, there's all kinds of obviously really serious issues in the world. So I can't speak on everybody's challenges, but man, if there was one challenging thing that people go through, if I was given the ability to just snap my fingers and have one thing disappear, it would be cluster B personalities, because it's horrific. I can't even begin to imagine what they go through. So I believe that. Having said that, of course, that doesn't change the fact they are fully responsible and should be held fully responsible and accountable for the effects of their actions. All right. So now I'll give you some idea. Of course, it's a trauma response. When you've gone through neglect that creates that black hole inside of you, which arrests your emotional intensity and development. Another thing that I found in my research is that people with borderline personality disorder often suffer from all kinds of physical ailments, intense, maybe nervous pain, sometimes, sensitivity to touch, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to any kind of stimuli, which can result in, challenging physical, painful things that they go through. I forgot what my point was about that. Anyway, so I have, as you can tell, I have a tremendous amount of empathy for them. And I believe that. I accept that. When somebody says that borderline personality disorder is a trauma response, I am completely 100% behind that, because the trauma they have experienced and continue to experience is extremely intense and a very sad thing indeed. Now, does that mean that borderline personality disorder is not a mental illness? Well, remember critical thinking. If you've heard me talk about critical thinking, in order to have a conversation about anything, we have to lay a foundational assumption. Now, people who say borderline personality disorder is not a mental illness, it is a trauma response, they are shoving their assumption down your throat, and they are forcing you to then talk about borderline personality disorder from their vantage point and from their agenda. They have an agenda. We all have agendas. There's nothing wrong with having an agenda, unless you're not aware of what your agenda is. So, as it turns out, there's a few people who've come onto the channel who are codependents. Now, a codependent does not want borderlines to have a mental illness either. Because if you are an untreated codependent, what you want, your fantasy, is to be able to heal the borderline so they can turn around and love you. In order for them to heal, they have to at some point become rational. And that means that they will have to go, oh yes, I now rationally see what I've been doing and why it's wrong, and now I'm going to stop. And they'll have the ability to have an identity to operate from, to change their behavior from then on. So if you are an untreated codependent, meaning you don't like the idea of going no contact, you don't like the idea of accepting that there's no hope for an untreated toxic borderline who will ever love you. You don't want to hear me say that, and you don't want to hear me call you a codependent, because you're still holding on to the hope that you can make it work. So you don't want it to be a mental illness either, unless you're, feeling rageful and hurt. Then you'll call it all kinds of names. And I've seen this when I came on early on the channel, and there was, specifically, I'm thinking of one woman who, just launched into a personal attack upon me about I was stigmatizing borderlines, and you don't understand what they've been through, and this person went on to say things like, I stand up, I'm in the nursing field, codependent, I'm in the nursing field, and I stand up for those who can't speak for themselves, and blah, 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 blah. This is obviously somebody who has, who is an empath, who is confusing seeking out hopeless, toxic relationships in order to relive their dysfunctional, childhood of origin. Um, they're confusing that with having the ability to truly love unconditionally, which includes knowing what somebody's limitations are and knowing that, yes, you can name somebody. Yes, that person with only one leg is not capable of running a marathon. It's not that they're not evil people. They can't run a marathon. A true empath goes, yeah, somebody with borderline personality disorder, that they're still toxic and they're not able to, they haven't found any recovery or therapy yet, or it hasn't taken a hold yet. They're going to, with a full, complete empathic understanding, say, oh yeah, that person has borderline personality disorder, and they are incapable of any kind of intimate, committed, romantic relationship. And because I have unconditional love for them, and because I have true empathy, which means that I don't have an agenda, I'm not going to expect them to be able to do something they're not capable of doing at this moment. So that's why the empaths get so bent out of shape and get so angry. And again, I find it so ironic that the empaths are the ones who get so angry at me. It just, there was another one recently, somebody, I think I shared with you, it escalated. It started with, trying to, sort of negotiate with me. And then it came into, no, I disagree with you. And then it turned into, who the hell are you to tell me, your problem is, and this person was an empath. You're so empathic, you're going to point the finger and call me all kinds of names. Is that a very empathetic thing to do? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is that the assumption that it's either a trauma response or a mental illness is an assumption that you do not have to accept. I do not accept that. So when somebody wants to make the argument that borderline personality disorder is not a mental illness, it is a trauma response, that person is thrusting an assumption and trying to force feed me an assumption that I have to then take one side or the other. And it's not. It's not an either or. It absolutely is a trauma response that creates a mental illness. So that's like saying, I'm not a codependent, I'm an empath. To which I respond, yeah, that's right. One of the traits of being a codependent is being an empath. One of the traits of the mental illness of borderline personality disorder is a severe and extreme response to trauma. Trauma that is continuously going on within the individual. So yes, you're right. It is a trauma response. It is a mental illness. Mental illness, again, is, there's a difference between somebody who's having some emotional challenges, who goes to therapy for a little while and then works through it, heals themselves and goes back and then doesn't have that problem anymore. Oh yeah, there was a time in my life when I was really angry and nope, now I don't have that impulse. I don't feel the anger anymore. I worked through it. It was because, my so-and-so, this and that, and I was a blah, blah, blah. And now I've worked through that and I've healed that. That's not a mental illness. That's a psychological, issue. A mental illness is something that's not going to go away. So borderline personality disorder, unfortunately, and I'm saying this to partners of borderlines or ex-partners because I want you to understand that your delusion that the day will come when they will finally be able to receive your love, they will finally be able to see you for who you are, and they will then begin to trust you from then on out. Because that's one of the things. Why? All I do is love them, and they turn around and they attack me, and I didn't deserve that, and it's really quite challenging. Yeah, and I've experienced it here on this. Sorry, I'm laughing, but borderlines will come on, and I can tell by the way they interact with me. They'll want to connect with me. They'll want my phone number, or they'll say all kinds of really nice things to me. And I appreciate it, but I know that the devaluation is going to come. It's just a matter of time. If they're idealizing me, the devaluation will come. That's just a matter of time. Anyway, we can go on and on about that. But that's basically my point. My point is that, of course, it's a trauma response. And there's a bunch of other stuff I want to say. I really want to say, but I'm going to use my ability to have contrasting thoughts and feelings and take a constructive action. And there's some things that I won't say that I want to say. So that's it. Freedom.spirittao.com. So what I thought I was going to do, I thought that I was going to put up on that webpage a PayPal button, and that you would purchase a video course that I have made. I've finished the first phase of it, and I'm really happy with it. And I'm going to create at least 2 more phases. I may just continue to do more and more of these. And I've decided as of this video, and I give myself the right to change my mind in the future. But what I've decided to do instead of doing that is to have it a members only video option on YouTube. So you can join and become a member of this channel, and you can get access to those videos. And I'll make some more videos explaining about exactly what's going on, and maybe have a little trailer and blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to still go ahead and keep that up there, because when people go to that freedom.spirittao.com, I will explain what it is, and send them back to YouTube to just simply become a member, subscribe as a member on the YouTube channel. And we'll try it out. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else. But I thought about it, and I thought about how much, if this were my other channel, if I were to create a video series like this, I think about how much money to charge. And because of this channel, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and make it a lot more affordable than that. I feel I have every right to charge as much money as I want for my things that I create, but this channel, people are in a lot of pain, and so I'll try and make it more affordable. So keep your eyes open for the opportunity to become to become a member or join or something like that on YouTube. You'll see that very soon. So that's it for me. Can't think of anything else. I've talked myself. I've babbled too long, so I'm going to shut up now. All right, my friends, thanks for your time. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.